So, our first speaker for this conference is he brings decades of research into how exercise and physical activity shape the brain across the lifespan. Dr. Art Kramer is the founding director of the Center for Cognitive and Brain Health at Northeastern University in Boston. He is currently an emeritus professor and also a leading researcher on aging, cognition, and neuroscience. His work explores how lifestyle factors like physical activity, sleep, and diet shape brain health across the lifespan. So today he'll share his insights on the effects of exercise, physical activity on cognitive and brain health across the lifespan. So please let us welcome Dr. Art Kramer.
Okay. One. It works. You're right. Uh, well, thanks to Adele for inviting me, and thank you for that kind introduction. Um, Saying I've been doing this for decades, does that mean I'm really old? Because I am. I'm fairly old. So I've spent most of my career at the University of Illinois, a place called the Beckman Institute for Advanced Science and Technology, the last 9 years at Northeastern. And the word free and freelancer I really like because I'm finally free of administrative duties. I've done that for way too many years, and I'm not doing that anymore. I'm doing research, mentoring young faculty and students. So what I'll talk about today is the effects of exercise and physical activity on cognition and brain health. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a number of topics that I'll cover, and I'll try to do it relatively quickly. This is a list of the topics. Let's go on to the first one. Next slide, please. So a lot of the research that underlies the mechanisms or our understanding of the mechanisms of exercise and physical activity comes from my colleagues in the animal research world, people like Bill Greeno and Rusty Gage and Carl Kottman and on and on and on. Those studies tend to get run both in enriched environments, and the top left is an enriched environment for a rodent. There's no predators to eat them. There are lots of things to explore. The Cirque du Soleil animal on the top right is from Bill Greeno's lab years ago at the University of Illinois. Bottom left is to remind me that social interaction is important too. There are a number of factors that can help us live a healthy life. So a pointer. Okay, well, I'll just, okay. There we go. And the little guy on the bottom right is had a tough workout, so he's toweling off right now. Next slide, please. Oh, I can do it. Oh, yeah. Okay, thanks. So this is a brief description by Henriette von Prague, a colleague of mine, about how these experiments get done with animals. There are at least two different conditions, and they're pretty simple and simple differences. A running wheel is in the enclosure for one set of rodents and not for the others. Those are the sedentary rodents. There's some measurement of performance or cognition. The Morris water maze is one such task. For those of you unfamiliar with it, it's kind of muddy water, not very transparent. And then there is a platform. Rodents don't like to drown any more than we do. So they want to find the platform and they have to remember where it is. So let's think of it as a memory test. And then often electrophysiology and some histology is done. And on the bottom, we have a list of the various changes that happen as a function of exercise, from changes in nerve growth factors like brain-derived neurotrophin factor and others, increased connections among neurons, which is synaptogenesis, angiogenesis, that's Bill Greeno's work, new vascular structure. And there's no reason to believe all of these things don't happen with humans. We're getting closer and closer to knowing the same things with new technologies with humans, all the way down to the bottom here, which is enhanced learning and memory. And this research has been going on for decades. On the top, those little green dots on the photomicrographs are new neurons being born in an older animal's dentate gyrus that sits within the hippocampus and supports increased memory. To move on a little bit, we'll talk about some meta-analyses, and there are more and more done all the time. This is an old one that Stan Kolkham and I did a number of years ago, but a lot of this holds true today. There's maybe more controversy, as there probably was going to be, but here we're looking at the effects of an exercise program. In this case, it's walking or jogging with older adults over 55 years of age. And on various kinds of cognition. And we see all the way over on the left, we see executive control, which tends to be a big winner. Things like cognitive flexibility, working memory, the ability to multitask, and so forth. But interestingly, all of these different aspects of cognition on the bottom of the slide are benefited by exercise. So we can move on from years ago to the present, and there have been a number of other meta-analyses. The one on the left is with acute bouts of exercise. So even brief bouts of exercise can be useful and can enhance cognition, decrease depression and anxiety, and so forth. This is done with young adults. On the right is a study that I did with some of my colleagues from the University of Shenzhen in China. And this is a study looking specifically at changes in brain structure and function using MRI and fMRI. Again, lots of positive effects here. On the bottom left, a very recent study, 2025, by a group of researchers that examined the effects of exercise and a meta-analysis across a variety of studies on cognition, memory, and executive function, and found some interesting effects. All the way down to the bottom on the left there, the largest effects were essentially for multimodal interventions. These days, we often call this exergames. These are games that Microsoft and others have produced, as we can produce them too. I have, and others have, as a way to combine perhaps social interaction, team playing, with intellectual engagement with exercise. Not diet in there. We haven't gotten diet yet. And then a meta-analysis on the right that's done with Alzheimer's patients, showing improvements in ADLs and IADLs. Those are instrumental activities of daily living that we all like to be able to do well, and often or show some disadvantage when we have a disease like Alzheimer's. So what about some of the studies that underlie these meta-analyses? So let me take you through. Again, this is essentially how the studies are done. Mr. or Ms. Centipede decided walking was a good exercise. Walking is an exercise, especially for older adults. For younger adults, it's often jogging or running. For kids, often playing, that we'll hear more about today. Tends to be the exercise condition, and Mr. Gumby didn't do what he should have done, that is stretching. Stretching toning is often the control condition, again, to keep people as active as in the exercise group, but not improving cardiorespiratory fitness. And I'll talk mostly about cardiorespiratory fitness, but that doesn't mean that other forms of exercise, like resistance exercise, that is weight training, Eastern practices like Tai Chi and yoga, don't also benefit cognition and brain health. They do. And we've done some of the studies, as have some of the folks in this room. So in terms of brain structure, we can use a technique that a friend and colleague of mine and winner of the Nobel Prize, Paul Lauterbur, invented, and that is structural imaging, to look at gray matter and white matter, magnetic resonance imaging. And here we have some panels from an older study that Stan Kolkham and I and a number of others did. The little blue panels, the little blue dots there, are increased gray matter volume, that is cell bodies, neurons, glia, supporting structure, and so forth. And the orange yellow in the middle, that's the corpus callosum that interconnects the left and the right hemisphere. That's white matter. And this has continued to be found as a function of exercise. This was a 6-month exercise intervention with older adults, I believe above 59 years of age. 59 doesn't seem old anymore to me, but it was at the time. I'm 72, by the way. And a number of other studies have found similar kinds of things. This is a bit more specific, and this is done by Kirk Erickson, who's now the director of neuroscience at Advent Health in Florida and elsewhere. And what Kirk and a group of us found was the particular nuclei, for example, the hippocampus, that supports various aspects of memory, specifically what's referred to as declarative memory or episodic memory, in which we bind different things together, people's name, where we met them, what we talked about, and so forth. The blue panel, the blue bars or the blue lines indicate an individual on an exercise, simply walking. These are older adults, increasing the size of the hippocampus over a period of 1 year, 3 days a week, 50 minutes a day. And this is quite unusual because if we look at most folks, we look at hippocampal volume and the volume of many brain regions as we age, it doesn't increase. It does here. Now, we wouldn't know exactly what the underlying mechanisms are because we can't drill down to the neurons or the astrocytes, the glia, and so forth. Hence the need for the animal research. And we do know from animal research like Rusty Gage's work, Carl Kottman's work, that new neurons are born in old brains in the dentate gyrus of the hippocampus. So could that be part of it? Sure. But not every nucleus shows this difference between the control condition, toning and stretching, that's the red line, and the blue lines, which are the aerobic conditions. These are panels from another study that a number of us have done at the University of Illinois and elsewhere, looking at white matter tracks, that is the interconnections within and between hemispheres. And what we find is that those white matter tracks increase in integrity. Again, these are in older brains. I'll mostly talk about older folks, but not completely, I promise. And we see a relationship to VO2 max, which is kind of the gold standard for cardiorespiratory fitness. You get on a treadmill, it goes faster, it gets steeper, you breathe into an oxygen mask, and that's what you're measuring. And we see that in terms of white matter. So it's not just gray matter or the cell bodies that do the computations, but it's also white matter. How about brain function? So far, I've just talked about structure. And the way I think about it is that we have fitness. It doesn't have to be aerobic. It could be resistance, and others will talk about resistance exercise at the conference related to cognition. Is functional connectivity, that is the connectivity between regions in the brain, does that increase as a function of physical activity and exercise? By the way, it decreases as a function of aging. So that's the question here. And one way we do it is look at some of the networks that have been mapped out in the field of neuroscience and cognitive neuroscience. And I have, I guess, 4 of them listed here. The default mode, I think that the default mode network is on when we're off. That is when we're introspecting, thinking about things. There's frontal executive, which happens to support executive function, memory, cognitive flexibility, multitasking, and so forth, and so forth. So they're color-coded here, and we've looked at these networks, and of course they're distributed throughout the brain. We've looked at these networks and essentially boiled down many terabytes of data to a few bar graphs. The blue bars represent individuals in the non-cardio group, the toning and stretching over a 1-year period. The yellowish orange bars represent individuals in simply a walking group. And YAs I'll tell you about in a while. And what we see, we're looking at different interconnections within and between networks here. And what we see uniformly in these panels to different degrees is that when individuals are essentially walking 3 days a week, 50 minutes a day, these are relatively sedentary. Think of them as couch potatoes, older people, which is the bulk of our population. Unfortunately, we don't get enough exercise and physical activity. I used to live in the Midwest, and in the Midwest, we tended to drive everywhere. I live in Boston now. We tend to walk everywhere. I wonder if Boston is a healthier city. It certainly is a younger city. There are a lot of young people. But what we see here is that those yellowish orange bars keep increasing over time. That's generally thought to be a good thing, and I'll tell you why I think that in a second. But really interesting to me, we're lucky we had a group of 20 to 30-year-olds. That's the unfilled bar. That's the YAs, young adults. So after a period of 1 year, to a great extent, the older folks, again, 60 and up, are getting to the same point in terms of connectivity within and between networks as younger folks. And that has implications for performance. So here's the relationship or the correlations between 2 different forms of cognition, executive function. It's a bunch of different things. These are latent constructs and short-term memory. And what we see is a correlation in a number of these interconnections within networks for executive function. That is, increased correlations, increased connectivity results in increased performance. So we can put a little check mark there. We can also look at a variety of other factors. So I had mentioned that in animal research, there are often histological examinations, that is, snippets of brain tissue, to look at nerve growth factors like BDNF, IGF-1, VEGF, et cetera. They all have to do with the maintenance and enhancement of interconnections, synaptogenesis, or connections among neurons, neurogenesis, and other things. So what we were able to do with that on the panel on the right is that we looked at the relationship between connectivity that I just showed you in the previous slide, and there's some on this slide too on the left, and BDNF change. Now, this isn't the way I'd prefer to measure BDNF, but nobody ever volunteers for histology. The animals aren't asked, of course, but the humans don't. So we can derive BDNF, IGF-1, and VEGF from the blood. It's an imperfect measure of brain proteins and brain nerve growth factors. But what we find is on the top, that's the relationship for the control condition. No significant correlation. We look at the bottom, a significant, highly significant correlation, 0.52, between increases in BDNF and increases in connectivity. So what we often try to do in these studies, and many others that'll speak today and tomorrow, is to try to bring some of the human research where we can ask people questions and really delve into what they're feeling and doing and how well they're performing, closer to the mechanisms that we can look at with animal studies by using some of these new techniques. This is a study I did with my colleagues from Sweden, Lars Nyberg and others. And here we're looking at positron emission tomography measures of the striatum, the corpus striatum. And what we find here is also that aerobic exercise is associated with increases in these proteins, dopamine proteins, and receptor D2 in the striatum with about 50 subjects. Most of our experiments have 100 to the most recent one, 650 subjects. And this is the most recent one. This isn't published yet. This is a study. The PI is a former student of mine, Kirk Erickson, who's the director of neuroscience at Advent Health in Florida. And a big study, 650 participants, 3 separate groups, causal study. It's an RCT. And what we look at is we have the control condition, toning and stretching. We also have 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise. Think of it as power walking, and 225 minutes, so 50% increase. And what we see on the left-hand side, that's executive function on the y-axis, and on the x-axis is before and after 12 months of this program, 3 to 5 days a week, depending upon the condition. And we see that more is better here. That is 225 minutes a week give you a bigger benefit than 150, than stretching and toning. But really interestingly, and I think this in a way makes the paper, we did not have people with Alzheimer's. We did not have people, at least at the start of the recruitment, with mild cognitive impairment or Lewy body disease or frontal temporal dementia. But we certainly had people with biomarkers that predict these diseases. And one of them is p-tau. And that's what we're looking at here. These are blood biomarkers. We can derive this in positron emission tomography. We've done both. But when we look at on the left, we can look at low levels of p-tau. That's not very predictive of future Alzheimer's, or high levels of p-tau. That's on the right. And what we see there is that the benefits and the distinctions between these 3 conditions is much larger for individuals at high risk for Alzheimer's. This isn't published yet. Okay, so what about a point of no return? I've already told you that people that are at high risk for Alzheimer's dementia can show benefits, but here are a number of studies over the years with colleagues and students showing benefits for breast cancer patients in terms of some measures, Parkinson's patients, a very recent one on MCI, or mild cognitive impairment, stage that sometimes becomes Alzheimer's and other things, and finally multiple sclerosis. And this occurs in terms of brain structure and in terms of brain function. Up on the top right, those are fiber tracts. So that's the integrity of the white matter. So is there a point of no return? Maybe, but we don't know what it is. So people that have diseases can also show benefits, often from a different baseline. So what about across the lifespan? I told you mostly about older folks and middle-aged folks. Well, the little panel on the top left is kind of a hypothesis. What is the relationship between exercise and in this case, hippocampal volume and cognition? And if we look at, this is all with kids, 8 to 12-year-olds, by the way, and my colleagues and I have done a lot of work with children too. So if we look at the bottom, that's a way to break up various kinds of cognition. And we find that for the black bars are higher fit kids, the gray bars are lower fit kids, and we find that under certain conditions, the condition on the right-hand side, which is relational or declarative memory, which, by the way, is supported in large part by the hippocampus, and we know the hippocampus benefits both in terms of connectivity and in terms of structure from physical activity and exercise. We see that on the top right, and we also see the relationship between relational memory across individuals, the little triangles, and hippocampal volume on the bottom right. This is a study from some colleagues at the University of Granada in Spain, a slightly bigger study. And at the bottom here, they're looking at, they have a control condition. Again, this is kind of a passive control condition, not what I would prefer, but whatever. And in the bottom, we have different aspects of cognition, and we see benefits for the kids in the exercise program in most cases. So it's not just in our lab by any means. So what about some examples of how we might further enhance the study of lifestyle benefits and exercise on healthy brains and minds? And here are a few possibilities. Let me briefly tell you about them. Most of this stuff is published recently. So what about machine learning? So I know that just because I'm over 70, I can learn new skills. So I've learned a lot of machine learning in the last few years, and I do that with my colleagues in computer science and physics and so forth. And what we have on the left here are what we're looking at is predicting adherence to these programs, because adherence for the most part for sedentary individuals is a real chore. I mean, they haven't done this for their lives or for many years. It hasn't become part of their lifestyle. So essentially, we looked at various predictors, both behavioral predictors as well as neuroimaging predictors from MRI and fMRI. And what we find, I think the most important panel is the top left, the little colored bar graph. What we found is that if we combine these different predictors in these machine learning algorithms, this was elastic nets, it could be support vector machines, it could be random forest, doesn't really matter. They do different things, have different advantages and disadvantages. But what we see is that if we combine across predictors, we win big in terms of variance. We still don't account for a lot of the variance. There are other ways to do this too, and here's from my colleague Angela Duckworth, and she does these mega studies. And what Angela and her colleagues have done here is across about 50 different labs, they've tried different interventions to get people off the chair, to get people moving a bit more, to make them a little less sedentary. And these are the big hits from the top to the bottom. She ordered 50 of them in terms of attrition or people sticking with the programs. Paying small amounts of money tends to be one of the big ones. And by small amounts of money, I mean small amounts of money. It's less than $1 for a session to get people to come in and do what they said they were going to do. This is tough. And this is why health clubs can outsell their memberships that they can accommodate by a huge number, because you pay and you don't come. I mean, I don't mean you personally. Maybe you do. I hope you do. So that's another way to use different methodologies to enhance our understanding of exercise and brains. What about new metrics? My colleague Brad Sutton at the University of Illinois has derived a metric which is looking at the viscoelasticity of the hippocampus. We usually look at volume. This is a way to look at how elastic it is. and the more elastic it is, the better. And what we see here is this relationship, not simply with volume, with either neurons or supporting structure or white matter, but also viscoelasticity. Again, more better. Other work by Agnieszka Brzezinska, who's now at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, she's found individual differences in the variability of the blood oxygen level dependent signal, the signal that underlies MRI, and exercise benefits in cognition and brain health. So variable is good here. Often variable isn't good. It is good here. So that's another new metric. We might ask, can we predict future benefits of fitness training on cognitive and brain health? And here, we can ask whether we know that brain networks that exhibit a modular organization, that is, that have high connectivity within network, tend to be important. And we knew that from a number of studies done on the West Coast. And so the question here is, if we look at modularity, what's the relative percentage of connections within network versus between networks, and whether that predicts potential benefits from fitness training before you do the fitness training and then later do it. And this is done by Pauline Bankert, a graduate student of mine that unfortunately passed away from cancer at a young age. But this was from a 6-month exercise intervention, 4 groups. I'll show them to you in a second. 2 aerobic groups, one of them with a nutritional supplement called lutein, and then 2 other groups. And here are the groups illustrated. Again, we're looking at executive function. I guess we look at all kinds of cognition, but I guess we like executive function. And we can look at here on the x-axis of these 4 panels on the bottom right, we can look at modularity. Increased modularity is related to increased executive control. And again, this is one measure before the program, and then the outcome of the 6-month program. So yeah, we can predict to some extent who will benefit to the largest extent based upon brain function in this case. What about multimodal interventions? There are many of them. My first student, who I guess annoyed me a little bit because he retired at the same time I did for the second time. And he's much younger, Dave Strayer, a fantastic researcher. But what Dave and his colleagues have done, not this paper, but others, I kind of like the attention restoration theory. ART, that's my name, attention art, right? So this is a notion that comes out of the University of Michigan that being in nature is restorative in terms of various aspects of cognition, memory, executive function, and so forth. And Dave and others have taken it a little further, creativity in the wild, and taken their students. Fantastic experiment and also fun. Dave has been at the University of Utah for many years, so he would take his students out to the Wasatch Mountains and they'd hike around for a week and then have control conditions. Are there some placebo effects here? Perhaps, but there have been enough studies where I don't think that's much of a problem. And what they found is that essentially walking and hiking in nature as compared to in cities, that tends to be the comparison condition benefits cognition. In fact, one of their measures is creativity, something we all want more of. 50% improvement. Isn't that amazing? You don't find a 50% improvement in anything. And here's another study out of Stanford, and they frame it in terms of walking. It's walking in nature compared to not walking in nature. So what about other multimodal kinds of experiments or studies? What other factors might be combined? This is the finger study. Some of you are familiar with it. It's from Scandinavia, a 2-year study of diet, exercise, cognition, and a variety of other things, vascular risk. And what they found is in terms of various aspects of cognition, an improvement as a function of this multimodal intervention compared to a control. Of course, the problem here is you can't pull it apart very easily. You can't look at the relative contribution. I'll show you a study we did, compliments of the Office of Naval Research, where we were able to pull it apart. It costs a lot of money and it takes a lot of time, but we'll get to that in a second. So here's another study called the Pointer Study. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's been published recently. Again, it's a number of different aspects of lifestyle that we, intellectual engagement, social interaction, exercise, etc., compared to a control condition. And again, that's the yellowish orange bars on the top. We find benefits for the combined condition. So this is another way to go. The question is, can we pull it apart? Here's a study we did a few years ago. Thank you, the Office of Naval Research. How am I doing with time? How many minutes do I have? Oh, plenty of time. I could give another presentation. Kidding. I know I talk too fast. So this is a study a few of us did, and we looked at a bunch of different conditions. Cognitive training. I invented a video game. Can you imagine that? Physical fitness, brain stimulation, transcranial direct current stimulation, the dorsolateral nucleus. And also another experiment, physical fitness, that's Mind Frontiers, that's that game, and meditation training. And then this is summarizing a lot of work and a lot of money. But we looked at a number of different metrics of decision making. They're all the way over on the right as a function of condition. And we didn't just lump it together. We did lump it together. And then we had individual conditions for the same 4 months of fitness training, of cognitive training, of meditation, and of transcranial direct current stimulation. And you can see some of these Cohen Ds, the larger number, bigger effect. It is interesting that 4 months, this needs to be replicated for sure, because I've never seen another one of these. Why? Because it costs a hell of a lot of money. And we had at least 60 subjects in each of these conditions. These are, let's see, 18-year-olds to 47-year-olds. So college students to folks that hang around college, some professors, some staff, and so forth. And we can see the effect sizes. We get benefits for all of them. The Cohen's D is high enough, but differential benefits for different ones. And it gets more complex than that. So we've played the game in some other studies of, so what's the order? If you have different factors, what should be first? And a fellow by the name of Gerd Kemperman, who worked with Rusty Gage, animal researcher, molecular and cellular level, has found years ago, after Rusty and Gerd and I had a discussion, a debate many years ago, exercise, my argument was exercise should go first because it'll change the brain structure and function. Then it'll allow more efficient encoding for intellectual challenges and so forth. Maybe, who knows? But that's what worked out in the animal studies and the rodent studies that Gerd did. So we have a lot more to learn here. What about generalizability beyond the lab? And I'll just talk about one. So in addition to the other things I do, I've been very interested for about 20 years in virtual reality. And I participated with computer science and engineering colleagues. I was also in engineering in building VR. And this isn't the VR goggle things that we have today, and they're relatively inexpensive. This was a multi-million-dollar cube. And we could back project and integrate the back projections with these huge RGB projectors, like probably one around here somewhere, on the back of these surfaces, including the floor. And what we did, this is one of many experiments that we did with kids, but we've also done with Division I athletes and older people, etc. And essentially, this is a comparison of higher fit and lower fit. We've also done fitness training in terms of your success rate in crossing a road. So we created a road with lots of lanes of traffic, up to 4, I think. The cars could be variable in their speed. I don't know. I hope I'm the only one in this room that's been run over by a couple of cars. But when I moved to Boston, that happened, and they put me back together like Humpty Dumpty. So I don't recommend it. But essentially, what this is on the y-axis is, did you get run over or not? Because we ran over kids, we ran over old people, we ran over, and we're allowed to do it here. It's perfectly ethical, because they didn't have to have surgery as I did. And the black bars indicate the higher fit people, and the gray bars lower fit people. And we see differential benefits depending on condition as a function of being higher fit in a real world task. I'm going to skip the next one, but I can tell you kids, I'll just briefly tell you. Okay, so kids that are taking academic achievement tests, if they're higher fit, they do better. This is the inverse of the dumb jock hypothesis. I was one of those dumb jocks. I was a boxer. I was a martial artist. I was a wrestler. I was a runner, triathlons and marathons. And I think at the time when I was young, everybody thought, except for the jocks, that is, that we were pretty dumb. Ha! We're not that dumb. We actually can do well. And the kids that have higher cardiorespiratory fitness tend to do better in these standardized tests. That's just on the right-hand side. Okay, let me summarize. So relatively brief fitness interventions, they are brief, up to 2 years compared to our life. That's pretty brief. Improve a variety of perceptual and cognitive abilities, increase brain volume in regions that normally show decline with aging, and changes as a function of childhood, including the hippocampus, change functional brain networks that relate to improved performance, promising fitness and cognitive brain effects with children. I didn't show you that much, and I didn't cover it today because everybody else is covering it, or many of you are covering it. But exercise decreases anxiety and depression and increases self-esteem and self-efficacy. We've done a bit of that, although it hasn't been our main focus. So where to go for here? I think we need to understand much better the boundary conditions on exercise effects on cognition and brain. There was a recent meta-analysis by a group in Granada, the same place another group found benefits for kids. They did a meta-analysis. The conclusion is, forget about it, you're wasting your time. I don't think that's the right conclusion. I can give you that reference and the replies to the paper. Most RCTs show benefits, small or medium size, from exercise, but they're pretty short exercise studies for the most part, some of them just months, and nobody goes beyond 2 years in an RCT. In observational studies, sure. I think we need to know more about how to interleave these various lifestyle factors: social, physical, cognitive, diet, when, how much, what's the best sequence. Don't have much of a clue here other than that work by Gerd Kemperman I told you about. And are these common or separate mechanisms? Are they integrated mechanisms? Again, we don't know for the most part. How about genetic moderators? We've done a little of this, looking at the E4 allele on the APOE gene. You have one higher risk. You have two E4s on APOE, 17 times the risk of people that don't have them for future AD. Do you show benefits differentially for people at high risk? I showed you some data unpublished thus far, submitted to a medical journal, that suggests, yeah, you may actually show benefits for high-risk people. How about predicting adherence? If we can't get people to do the exercise, the physical activity, it isn't any good. And beyond the laboratory door, and I showed you the VR experiment and the one with the kids. That's it. Thank you.